Hi peeps. So here it is, the very first video. I'm fumbling with all the equipment, but you know what? It doesn't matter. If you haven't yet, please watch the very first video. And I think I'm going to name it something like all the materials we need and the reason we're doing this, because it explains in much more detail what you're going to need. Get your canvas. I have a little spot here where the gesso came off. It's not going to hurt it. So I'm going to just use it. For this particular painting, we're going to need the following colors. And these are not the colors by name. You can just kind of gauge at the store or online the general color scheme or the general color of it. Different companies name them different things. I'm just going to kind of give them my own name. The first one, always have that baby handy. White. White is your best friend. So I'm going to load up my tray in the middle. Second one is kind of like a medium blue. We're going to need these two for the background. I will write a list on this video, but the other colors are kind of a lime green, light green, a dark green, like a hunter green or a forest green. We need a dark brown, and I know you can't tell because the sticker fell off, and now the bottle is sticky, but it's a dark brown. Kind of a lighter brown. Forget what the name of this is. Chocolate brown. I call it mocha latte. We need a burnt orange and black throughout, but I will make a list so you can just go shopping or have everything handy. My 3 brushes: large flat, medium flat, small round. We're going to start with a large flat, and with acrylic paint, while we blend everything on here, make sure you work in small sections while you're blending with several different colors. So don't cover everything in white and then try to blend the blue into it, because your white will be dry by the time that you get to the blue to blend. So work in small sections and work your way all the way around until you get to about a quarter of the way up or 3/4 of the way down. I'm going to have a little bit of ground up here. It's not exact brain surgery here, just kind of go with the feeling. Oh, and before you even get started, make sure you're all set. Turn on some awesome music. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee. Cheers. I'm not drinking wine right now. I will get to the wine once I get the hang of this recording thing a little bit more. So, cheers. And here we go. White paint. Very little pressure on your brush. Lots of paint. Acrylic requires a lot of paint, so scoop it up. Paint a section. Just kind of brush out the lumps and bumps just to get it nice and wet. I'm going to go with just not even a quarter of the canvas. Start with a little bit of blue on the corner of your brush and start blending it in right over top of the white. And here is where you can play. Here is where you can make it super smooth, blend it in really well, or you can show a lot of brush strokes. You also want to include these edges on these canvases. If you paint these edges in the colors that you're working with already, they will not require a frame. They look nice and finished. And you can go over this, make it darker as you like, or not, uneven, super smooth. This is where you play. This is where you make it yours. We're going to continue on and finish up a little bit more. some more blue. As you can see, this makes some really cool stroke patterns. And the more you go over this, the smoother it'll get. Again, this is a personal preference of yours. You can make it super smooth, or you can make it very textured. So we're going to work our way down. More white. If your painting gets too dark, just add a little bit more white. White is your friend. At least with this combination. A little bit more blue. More white. And work your way down. It does not have to be even. Skies usually are not entirely even unless you have, you know, one of those Northern Michigan bluebird days, which are pretty epic when we do have them. But I'm going to kind of make it a little bit uneven so it doesn't get that coloring book look. That can happen quite quickly. Oh, and I just flung paint. Don't fling paint. That happens when you use a little bit too much. Play with it dabbing if you like. It's a whole different look. I have a lot of white in here. Dabbing. You get a different texture. You can do that too. Turn your brush. Get a little bit different look. Or brush it. I want you to have fun with this, not worry about it. So do it the way that feels right to you. So, checking the edges here to make sure I get it. There, that's it. Now that we're changing colors, this is where your paper towel comes in place. Or you could actually use an old t-shirt or any kind of cotton rag or something like that. But please do not dab your brush like that. You will ruin your brush. Instead, wrap the paper towel around. Wrap it, squeeze it, pull it. Not my invention. And pull all the paint out of the bristles. Get them cleaned up as much as you can. And also reshape the bristles at the same time. So, here we go. I do the skin test. Nope, not showing up. We're good. I have a little lip right here. You may, if you have a easel, or you're getting too close to your body if you have it flat on the table, so just flip it. Flip it around so you can paint where you can reach best. Now, let's take some of the two browns, dark brown, light brown. We're going to paint a little bit of dirt. We're upside down, remember? So I've got my two browns here. With most browns, you need to do a test somewhere on a piece of paper or something if you want to mix it with white. Contrary to instinct, mixing white into a dark brown doesn't necessarily make a light brown. Brown is comprised of red and green, and depending on which of the two is heavier in the brown, it could possibly turn your brown into pink if it's really, really heavy on the red side. So test it first so you don't end up with a pink. Burnt umber, chocolate browns are usually okay. I'm going to use a little bit of brown. So after we painted the sky, and I'm going to turn it a little bit because I noticed it's actually a little bit darker than what shows up on the camera. I have my what are they called? I have my beams on the ceiling, so it's quite bright, the light is. But you want to have a nice bottom edge with dirt, and you want to have the sky. Next we're going to add some grass, so you need the 2 greens. I simply wiped my brush. My painting is dry. It dried very, very quickly. If you have to take a break, it would probably help to rinse your brush. What we want to do is very roughly cut in the grassy area. So I'm going to paint in an upward stroke what might look like grass already. So don't paint it with the flat side, paint it with the narrow side, and you want to kind of go uneven, because grass, unless it's manicured lawns, grass does not really grow all that evenly. You want to go a little bit below this line down here, and the general direction is kind of a little bit of an arch going this way. So over here it's going to be a lot shorter. And some of them grow to the left and some of them grow to the right. That's how meadows tend to grow. So they're not all just straight up. Down toward the bottom you can go a little bit heavier, like more solid. You definitely do not want to have any of the background show through down here. It gets pretty dense, and include that edge. You do not want to just stop at the edge of your painting. So I'm going to go a little bit below here, because you know it just kind of doesn't just start on the line. So very, very quickly. The quicker the better, because you don't want to think about every single blade of grass here. That's not helpful. Once you have a little bit there, you can go over with some of the lighter colors, some of the lime green, put some highlights in. It's just light reflections. The grass is still the same color, but the light hits it in a different way, so it looks like there's different shades of green. We can create a little bit of depth with this. You can even use a little bit of white. It won't stay white, it'll mix in with some of the greens and just create different shades of green. So we're getting there. Maybe some higher ones over here where the light hits them. Some are behind others. And down here. I'm just going back and forth. I'm not cleaning my brush while I'm going back and forth between the light and the dark green. You don't need to. If you find that the color turns into one solid mix of all the greens, just wipe your brush. We will add more detail to this later on. Right now we just need some coverage. So you can get one that goes across. You know, they kind of do their thing. I have found that humans tend to want to have everything nice and straight and even and symmetrical, but really it's not that way. So just kind of random directions here. So we have some wild grasses going right here. There we go. So the general shape of this grass is in diagonal, about halfway across the painting. I want to get rid of some of these loopies here. A little lighter. And if you keep going back and forth between the two, then you don't have a starting point where you set the brush down in a different color. It just blends into the color that's already on there and makes it a nice smooth transition between the two colors. So I think we'll leave it at that. Now we need to let this dry completely, and I will be back in a minute. So I'm thinking I'm getting the hang of this recording thing a little bit better. Next step. This is all dry. Still using my big brush. What we're going to do is cut in the fence line and the flower pot with white paint. Simply because the colors for the fence, the browns and grays, will cover better and they'll be more brilliant and they don't have to cover up the darker colors behind them. So let's see. With white paint, this will actually be quite translucent. That's okay. We just kind of want to cut in where everything goes. Don't be afraid. It's only paint. We can change it. Here goes the main post. Sort of in the middle, a little bit off to the side. Fairly far down, a little bit below the grass line. A little bit rounded top right here. I'm going to make a little rough cut fencing. And see how the green will still shine through? That's okay, because we're going to paint over it with an entirely different color later anyways. It's just to give us a nice clean undercoat. Don't go over it too much. Like I mentioned before, you might dissolve the paint that's below it if you keep rubbing over and over. It's not going to cover no matter how much you put on there or how much you move it around. So just put in a coat. Here we go. These are old fence posts. They don't need to be 100% straight. I'm going to put a cross beam right here for now. Maybe right about there. And once again, make sure you paint around the corner. And let's do another one right about here. About the same thickness, so about a brush and a half width. I gotta go a little bit farther down. There we go. And I'm thinking we might want to paint a broken one right about here. Kind of going down like that. Little rugged edge here. Just like that. Does not have to be perfect or pretty. And then we also want to cut in where we're going to put the flowers. So same reason. I'm going to put a pot of lavender right here, and I want it to have brilliant colors, but they won't be if you have a dark background and it's shining through your layers. That is the unfortunate drawback of using the craft paints with more water and less pigment versus the much harder to use artist's pastes. But bear with me, this is going to be cool. So what we want to do is right about here, I would say, like a little bit in the fence, just paint for now a rectangle like so. Very simple, everybody can do it. Does not even have to be completely rectangular. We're going to change it. Actually, what we want to do is go a little bit below the fence line right there. Make it a little bit below. And now we're going to change this particular thing into the shape of a flower pot, one of those terracotta pots. And we do this by painting a little bit of an angle on both sides and around the bottom a little bit, and then we round the top downward like so. Round the upper part that way like so. And then we want to put a little bit of a lip on here. They have a lip like so. And there's our basic shape for the pot. See, this is where the line would be. Like that. And there's the pot. We're going to do a second one because we're going to have one that's fallen over. Let's put it this way. It's a smaller one. I'm just going to paint another rectangle like that. Just like the first one. A little bit of an angle on the sides. Round the bottom. And then round the top. You will be able to see it on your painting probably much better than what you can see it on the canvas right now, because of the different layers of white and how they're drying in a different way. It's becoming translucent here, but that's just enough for allowing us to put our different colors on later. So again, there's a little lip right here, which is a little bit above the edge. And so your pot would lay like this. One this way and one standing up. The other thing that I'm going to do is paint a little sign that's hanging on the fence post. Any of these things, obviously you don't have to do them. If you want just one pot standing up, go for it. If you want a larger one, just one laying down, now you know how to do it. Just make it bigger. If you don't want the sign, don't do it. It's all good. But I'm going to paint a little crooked sign right here. Let's see, I think I'm going to lean it a little bit this way, like an old wooden sign, where I'm going to put a little saying in, and it's going to hang around that fence post. So there's our cutting in. You can hopefully see it on the video, but I can make out all these individual little things really, really easily because of the different drying times and the overlays. So only you have to see this right now, because we're going to change the colors and turn this into some cool looking stuff. Oh, one last thing we have to do is paint a little bit of the shape of the lavender bush, which is a general shape like so. Right here, for the same reason, once we put our color in here, the purples of the lavender, it's like a cone shape almost. Oh, won't show, but lavender likes to grow kind of cone shaped. Don't want to cover your sign too much. Maybe make this a little bit higher so we have different heights, and we don't have to stay within the perimeter of this later. We can make it a little bit bigger, but this is just so that we have a nice background. There we go. We now let this dry again. I'm still probably going to hold on to this brush for now. I'm going to stick mine in water while this is drying. Make sure this dries completely before you take the next step. Time to go and sip, or change your music, or do some chores for that matter. You know, it's nice to do a couple of chores. Alright, here we go again. So it's the paint is now dried and we can continue. We're going to work our way from the background to the foreground. At this point, I would like to remind you, please don't be so hard on yourself. We are not doing this to create the perfect painting. You can be your own worst enemy. I know that because I can be my own worst enemy. It does not need to be perfect. We don't always have to be perfect at everything we do. We just sometimes need to do things for the sake of doing them. And at this particular point in time, it is to turn off our minds a little bit from all the things that we may worry about, whether it's paying our bills or the health of a loved one or our own health. Just take a couple of hours out of your life and follow these step-by-step instructions. You can do every single step very easily, and you're gonna do great regardless of the outcome. Energy transfers, you know, from us to others or even onto objects. I believe that. So if you're really hard on yourself and you're very self-critical constantly while you're painting because it doesn't look exactly like this or exactly like you had imagined it, then you will be reminded every time you look at this painting of the horrible time that you had. And that is not my purpose here. Those thoughts will creep in your head. When they do, just remind them that there's no time for that right now. There's no space for those negative thoughts. Be gentle with yourself. It may be something that you have never done before, or it may be something that you've done a few times before, but it takes time. Painting is a learned skill, and it takes a lot of time, and every time you do another painting, you will get better and better and better. So be nice, be kind to yourself. We tend to forget us when it comes to kindness. I see this right now. People are out and about and helping others, and it's a wonderful thing, but we also have to remember to be kind to ourselves. So let's just finish up, or not even that. We're not there yet. Let's continue on. We're going to paint everything that's in the farthest background first. Of course, we have our very background right here kind of cut out already, but we're going to paint what comes next in the perspective layer, which would be the fence, and then in front of the fence is the sign, and in front of the sign is this big flower pot, and then in front of that is this one, and in that order is pretty much how we're going to paint. With every painting, in order for it to have a little bit more depth and not just look like a coloring book page that's been colored in by, you know, numerous different colors, we need to have a light source. We need to have a highlight and a low light of every item so that it looks rounder for the pot, more like wood for the fence posts, that kind of thing. So this particular painting, I want you to imagine a light source, the sun, or whatever you want to imagine in the sky, over here, right around here. We don't have it on the painting, but it's shining on, which means as it comes from this direction, all the things on the sides that get hit by the sun are going to be highlighted, and all the opposite sides are going to be shadowed. So we have the same color, but we're going to put a highlight on it and a low light on it, a lighter version of it for the highlight and a darker version for the shadow. Let's start with a fence. I'm moving on to my medium-sized brush, my number 8 flat, and we're going to paint the fence posts first. So we have the post itself, we have the crossbars, and then this one right here, the diagonal one, is actually pretty hidden behind all these flowers and everything else that's going to be in the front. Let's start with the uprights. I'm going to use my dark brown and go right over top, cover all the edges, and then I'm going to kind of stop right here where my sign starts. I've got to grab my plate right here. We're going to start with just the brown right now, and if you paint a little bit over this edge that you created, that's okay. That part's not going to matter so much. So here is the upper part of the post. Base color, remember, sunlight coming from there. So we want to put some lighter highlights. I'm using a little bit of the light brown and white. Paint this kind of rough. It's old wood. Here's our edge where the post starts. And then this is all kind of being in the shadow back here anyways. So we're just going to paint the brush empty. Dark brown. Here's where my sign starts. And I'm just going to paint down. So you're creating the darker edge here. Blend it in a little bit if you like. And if you want to use an even darker version of this, hang on, let's finish up this here first. Remember, there's my pot. It's kind of in my way. Your pot may be laying a little differently. That's okay. Just paint around it. Doesn't even have to be very clean at this time because we're going to put a clean edge on this anyways, on the pot and on the remaining flowers. This area I wouldn't worry about making it as light as that because there's all these flowers in front of it. So it's probably not going to be as lit by the sun as the upper part up here. But I want to get this side a little bit darker yet. So I need to add a mix between black and dark brown. But I don't want to just add black over here because it's going to be really strong. So make sure you have a wet edge. Make more brown, put more brown on here. Dip your brush in a little bit of black, just a little bit, and then rub it in an empty well. And that'll mix the black together with the brown that you have. And that's going to make this edge even darker. And if you make it a little rough, same here, then you start getting a little bit of depth into this. So we'll do the same thing, a little bit of black, rub it in an empty well, and then start working on the lower edge right here. And if it gets too dark, go into your brown, lighten it up a little bit, play around with it until you get the color that you like. As long as it's wet, you can manipulate this quite a lot. So here we go. We want this to be a little bit on the rough side because it is old wood. Now let's do the side rails, and I'm going to turn my painting for that just because it's going to be a lot easier to reach. I don't have to figure out how straight or where it goes. I'm already having my guides there. So same thing, just remember this time, now your sun is down here. So all the upper parts are the lighter parts and the lower ends are the dark, the shadows. So here we go. Lighter brown, a little bit of light and medium. And I'm going to actually paint this into the post just a little bit here because I want this to look like it's stuck in that piece of wood. Got paint on me. You can rub it on your clothes if you have painting clothes like me. I'm going to cover this up. Lighter version on the top because the sun is hitting it. Lighter version of your brown is what I mean. And this also helps it stand out a little bit. Remember, paint around the corner here and then just kind of blend it in. A little bit on the very light side here, so I'm going to add some darker colors. You can do your black again, rub it in an empty well, make the wood look a lot older. Uneven. There we go. Don't forget to wipe your brush every once in a while in between. Just all these colors start blending together and then you get mud. Try again up here, or actually would be down there. For now, I pull it a little bit into the post. Sorry about this piece together look. It seems my camera only records for a certain amount of minutes and then it just shuts itself off. So bear with me, I'll get the hang of it. But we want this edge right here to be quite dark. And I'm mixing a dark brown together with this terracotta orange. And then I'm also going to kind of paint this edge darker as well. But don't paint it all the way down to that shadow because we want this lip to stand out. The other area that's dark is on the very bottom of this pot, right here. So a little bit of orange. So I have a wet surface. And then I go back over it with some brown. Don't use just brown. It's going to be too brown. You just want this to be a shadow. Here's the lower edge of this pot. And then of course the inside, super dark. So a little bit of a lip. And we're going to make this a lot darker here in a minute. The abyss of the inside of a flower pot. So this is kind of the shape of a football right here, more or less. Depending on the angle. If it's flatter or rounder, it's just going to change the angle of your flower pot a little bit, and that's okay. So now we're trying to bring the colors out, the highlights and the lowlights, so that the pot looks a little bit three-dimensional. So cleaning my brush again because now we got to do the highlights on the other side. Clean brush, making sure it's still recording. Orange again. See how nice this covers now on the second coat. Right here and here. And now we add a little bit of white. And if you keep brushing it over, it's going to blend into a lighter version of the orange. I know it feels really white at first, but so there's our highlight. Maybe we have a little bit back here, just a bit from behind the plant on this upper lip. Not too much. And then here, a little orange. And right on this edge, on the very edge, is where you want a little bit of highlight. Paint around the bottom of that other pot. And it just kind of drags into this where highlight and shadow meet. I like to use my fingers to rub it in a bit. Fingers are fun to use in painting. They can do a lot. Sometimes even better than the brush can do. So here our pot is coming to life. It's beginning to look very roundish and 3D. And now we're going to do the same thing down here. Highlight right up here where the sun or our light source is hitting it. First a little orange, now a little bit of white. Mix a light orange. And it doesn't matter how far down you have it because everybody's angle is going to be slightly different. Rubbing it in. So there's these two old flower pots. We have to put a highlight on this rim. Another layer of orange first. And a little bit of white to make a lighter version of the orange. Just so that it stands out against the background. Against the rest of the pot. So we now have old terracotta pots. It's kind of cool how that works, isn't it? So a little bit more highlight because maybe they're a little shiny Maybe they're not so old. If you put a little bit more white on here, they'll be a little shinier looking. Maybe a little old, little newer. And this is just a little bit of white. My underlayment is still wet, so I'm not painting on a dry surface here. Otherwise it would be way too much of a color difference. Maybe a little bit here again. Just using what I have left in the brush here. And again, we're going to turn this into a much darker version. But before we do that, I want to clean my brush, wipe it out, and I want to put a little bit of a shadow under here. This seems like it's floating to me. So I'm going to take my brown, my dark brown, and paint just a little bit of a shadow, and that will determine the angle of your light source. It's kind of blending into the flower pot color, but here this angle right here should be fairly even with this angle. And in order for this to stand out a little bit, I'm going to go what we did earlier. I'm going to go with my black, rub it into an empty well together with a little bit of brown, and paint on that edge. This is not pure black, this is just a little bit of black and a little bit of brown. And kind of make this shadow just a little bit darker. Same here so that it stands out. I'm back. I was on a roll last night. I was going to finish this video and then my battery died. So here it is the next day. And we are going to finish painting this. So I finished off yesterday, sort of got cut off at the little shadows down here, which help pop those little terracotta pots. We're going to continue with some more shadows, you know, like this broken fence post thingy. Some shadows right here because, you know, the sun, remember, is coming from this side. So it's going to throw a little bit of a shadow, like grassy shadow. And we'll take it from there. Here we go. Still working with my number 8 flat brush, and I'm going to start by using the lighter of the two browns right here from the fence post. You can barely see it, but we want to go easy on the darkening of it because we can always go darker much quicker, then we can lighten it back up. So here, and then we're going to take some darken it a bit. Right there. We'll leave a little gap right here to distinguish between the two items. Make it the same angle. So our sun is always coming from the same direction. I'm going to do another one right here from this thing. But now this loop here needs to be painted kind of this way on this side. And it looks like it's actually hitting the ground. Doesn't have to be the perfect shape. And then we take our black again, swirl it in an empty well so it's not so strong. And maybe with a little bit of dark brown, make it even darker. So play around with it, make it a little darker. Does not have to be perfect because remember, the ground underneath is not perfect. It's not a soft, perfect surface. So There we go. You also want to include this bottom edge right here. It's important that you keep at it so that you don't end up with a weird cut off look once you hang this somewhere. I know lavender is not blooming right now, but honestly, in this doom and gloom, end of winter yuck, plus all the stuff that's going on at the moment, I think we're going to be creating some smiles with lavender and garden scenes. The rest of this area, since behind the pot right here we have grass, and behind the fence we have grass, we're going to take the lighter brown, still got dirty brown on there, and just kind of make a make like a little bit of a shadowy look to this. It does throw shadows. It lets a little bit of light through. I still have a lot of dark in my brush. And remember, the shadows go in the same direction. We can bend these a little because these are grasses, but we want to get this, generally speaking, quite a lot darker than what it used to be right here. Especially down at the line where the grasses start growing out of the ground. That's where the shadows are the densest. I'm going to take my finger and just kind of rub that in so I don't have a really strong line where one starts, whoops, one starts and the other one ends. Pull it in. So as long as you see some brush strokes here, you're going to be okay. There. Now we need to clean our brush. Either wipe it down with a paper towel or rinse it. Remember, wrap it, squeeze it, pull it. Let's work on the lavender for now, and we're going to need an undercoat to make the colors brilliant. So we're going to put 2 coats on plus a little highlight and a little shadow. I have a mix, well, not mix, but I'm going to use some purple. And we don't want to just use one color. Again, for the same reason I mentioned earlier, we don't want a coloring book look. So use a little bit of blue in there too. Back and forth into the purple, into the blue. Same blue as I used for the sky. You don't want to go with too many different types of blues in one painting because the light that hits these is very similar. So it's sometimes looks very bizarre if you use too many different shades. You can always lighten or darken the same blue, but stick with the same one. Little purple, little blue again. I do not want to blend this in too much so I don't end up with one solid color. Just to let you know, of course, the kids are home from school, so there might be some noises in the back. That's just the offspring. Just to get a base coat here at the moment. We don't have to go all the way to the bottom because we're going to put greens down in there. Already looks really cool this way. Actually, I don't think I'm going to put a second coat on because I want this to be kind of light and not too dense. Let's let that dry. Now we're going to clean the brush again. I like my paper towel, it's just my thing. And I'm going to darken the inside of this pot now. It's not dark enough, it needs to have a really strong shadow. So I'm going to take my brown. This is where you can take your time and really clean up those edges a little bit too. The brown won't be a solid brown. Remember, make your canvas work for you. Don't bend, don't kneel. I always cringe when people start kneeling on the floor. You can put a little bit of a shadow right here. Not much. We don't want it to look too cartoonish. Maybe just a little bit darker right here. Maybe even here. We have all the time in the world. I don't have my 3-hour limit to worry about right now, so we can really play with this. And you can turn off the video, do something else, and then come back to this. But down here, I'm going to take a little bit of black, rub it in an empty well, and then put the bottom edge much darker, where the shadow is the darkest. Maybe even a little darker than this. I'm going to turn this so I can reach a little better. Remember, step back from your painting often so that you see the effect that you're getting. It looks very, very different when you're right in front of it. Trust me, I do speed paintings. Those canvases are as tall as I am, and I am really close to them, so I can never see the whole picture. I have to step back, and I'm just darkening some key areas here where the shadows are really the darkest. Right here, right underneath. Right underneath here. My brush is not solid black. It still has a lot of brown mixed in with it, but these shadows really make matters pop. I think that's good. Let's leave it at that. Maybe right up here a little bit more. Right on this edge, so we popped the top of the post. Just a little bit. There. Okay. Cleaning brush. This time, because we have black in here, you may want to go and rinse your brush. I'm gonna not see what happens. Lavender does not look like that, obviously. So we need to make it look a little bit more like lavender. And I'm going to take my medium brush, my number 8 flat, and kind of make little thingies, little flower heads. They're like little candlestick type heads. Stand out a little bit more. I forget what the terminology is in the gardening world for this type of blossom. The most important thing here is, first off, that you don't cover the whole thing again. It's kind of a dabbing motion. They are not next to each other. They're all over each other, in front of each other, behind each other. Off to the side you have a rogue one kind of sticking out. You want the randomness in this. That's one of the hardest things to paint, is pay attention to symmetry. We do not want symmetry. Then I'm going to darken some areas, not all, because even within this head of flowers, we have shadows, darker areas and lighter areas. I'm going to go back to my blue, do the same thing. Just kind of in between a little bit. It's going to start mixing with my purple, and that's what I want. just so I don't have a solid color. I hope you guys are having a good day. I just ventured into town to get some groceries. School buses are out and about providing free food for the children, which is wonderful. But people are still out there and hugging each other and stuff. Not blame them. Okay, so here's that. And while you have this color on your brush, I'm going to wipe it down because I don't want the bulk of the color, but I'm not going to squeeze too hard to get all of it out. We're going to go into some white and start highlighting some of these little blossoms. Just off to the side. Mostly on this side, remember? Sun coming from that side. But some don't just do just one side. This is just a dab, no blending. Once it starts blending too much, then you need to stop and reload your brush. Sun's coming from this way, so we will have some highlights over here, just not as many. And this just helps distinguish the individual blooms. It's a lot heavier on this side. Again, your white will mix with the wet colors underneath, and we want that. We want this to not be just white. It's kind of a little dab, not much of a brush stroke. Very random. Just a little highlight here and there. I'm going to put a couple of them right here, especially against this dark background. But not as much as on the other side. Seriously, I have some massive issues. I didn't realize the camera turned itself off again. So after I painted the lavender, I did it in the same way that I used the purple and blue and white with just the green right here. Same exact way. Dark green first, a little bit of highlight. The leaves look very similar to the buds of the flowers initially. They look actually like rosemary. We don't have to have each individual leaf painted. It's impossible. Then, after I did this, so it's your dark green for the shadows, light green for the highlights, I put a few little grasses in front of the posts, fence posts, just to break it up a little bit, and did the same thing. Green, light green, dark green. Added a little bit of dirt coming right out of here, which is just your brown and a tiny little bit of black. It's kind of spilling out. Added a few little grasses here. I can't believe the camera just went bzzz and closed. But what I do want to do now that I see it actually, I'm going to mix a little bit of a green together with white instead of just having the light green and the dark green. It's going to give you even a little different hue of green that might actually show up a bit better yet on top. It's quite light. I'm just going to use it a little bit here and there to put over the area where the fence post is. Do not worry if you end up dragging your brush a little. Very, very little pressure. You're basically breathing onto the canvas versus brushing. Clean your tip often so that you have a nice, clean, sharp edge. It's still even very much blending in, so I'm going to use plain old white on my dirty green brush and make these stand out just a bit more here and there. Because they're in the foreground, we can see them a lot better. See how it's not even really painting white because I have the green on my brush as it is? So it's going to immediately start blending in down here a little bit. Now we let this dry. See, I have a little rogue one coming here. Remember, in a yard or garden or nature setting, nothing is ever really clean. We try our darndest, but it kind of grows wherever it wants to do. The growth, wherever it wants to go, it'll take place. So we'll leave it like that for now. Let it dry. Wash your brush, clean your brush, squeeze it, whatever you want to do. And then we're going to put the final touches on this. See you in a bit. Here we go. Doing our last final little touches. This is the fun part. I'm back at my number 8 little flat one. I washed it. It's still a little bit wet. Make sure you dry it. Just put a few little daisies in there, and that's really it. That's all we need to do. And the way that you do that is you load a little bit of paint in there, and with this little flat brush, all you have to do is push it down, and it makes a perfect little petal, flower petal. And some of these, you may have to go over it a second time, because it will get kind of dry. It will actually dry translucent. Just dragging it to the inside. Now we're going to do a whole lot of these. Once again, this is where it's important that you cluster them so you don't space them very evenly. I'm going to put a couple of them right down in here for a little bit of a color pop. You can make them in slightly different sizes. Maybe we'll paint one that has just a little bud. Look there. Make some tiny ones. Maybe even some up here. Push it down and drag it in. It makes the perfect little flower petals. Okay, let's put on a few more. How about we have one that's kind of just cupping up, so the stem would come down this way. Maybe here too. Now I know why Bob talks like he does when he did his videos, or when he did talk. It's fun. Put a few more down there. They can overlap a bit. See, I have a cluster of 3 right here, 2, one single one. Try not to fill in empty spots, because that's going to start making it look more symmetrical again, and that's what we're trying to avoid. I am going to cluster more up here though. I want some more, a little bigger. And one over here, a rogue one that's hanging out here, and maybe one even right over top of the pot, the one that's creeping out from in between there. You don't have to put as many in here, or you can put a whole lot more in here, totally up to you. I'm going to make some smaller ones. And as you can see, they're starting to dry. Hopefully you can see it. They're starting to dry a little bit on the translucent side. So I'm going to just go back to the first ones I painted and put in a little bit more paint. Very carefully in some areas. A little bit of shadowing in them is actually going to help make them look a little bit more 3D. So you don't want solid white. Just a couple of the little petals need to be a little bit more solid so we don't see the grass shining through too much. Don't overthink this. You don't need to have every single petal in a perfect shape. They really are not that way in real life. Some of them are crooked, some of them have pieces missing. There, and now we're going to get rid of this brush. Alright, here we go. Let's finish up. Not much more to do. We're down to the last little number 2 round. And I did forget to mention that there was another color right here, like an ochre yellow, mustard yellow, I like to use. We're going to put the little centers in here on most of these. Don't put them on the ones that are cupping up. You can't see the centers of them. Just a little. Double check, make sure you get them all. And then I'm going to go over that with a little bit of brown so they're not so yellow. They actually have little seeds in them. I'm not covering the entire yellow area, just a little bit of brown on the side. And cleaning my brush, doing just a little bit of a stem, a little wisp, nothing fancy. You can probably totally skip this step anyways. It's not going to matter in the greater scheme of things. But because we're doing it this way online, we're good. Now let's write something on there. And honestly, on a little sign like this, the more uneven your handwriting is, the better. So I would not do it in a Sharpie. I think that's going to be too clean looking. It's an old sign. So I'm just going to use my children's handwriting. Oh, look at that. I missed a... We have a free floater here. There we go. No more. I'm going to use dark brown and just go for it. Please don't tell me I misspelled it. Could be. Oh well. And here it's kind of fun if you actually hide some of the letters because they're behind. We still know what it is. Same here. I have some grass in front of it. Oh, I guess I just dumped into the black. Mayday! Not a big deal again. It could have a little black dirt on there. So the rest is hidden. And what we also need to do is hang this baby. Little loops. Goes behind there. First I'm using some brown. Let it come out from here. I can use a little bit of black to make it stand out a little bit more. Just a little over top of the brown so you don't end up with with a super black little chain there. Cleaning my brush. And I am going to call this one done. Bit more brown. Trust me, you can go on forever right now. You can find this, that, and the other thing. But I do believe I'm going to call this one finished. And put my little John Hancock right here. And that is it. Ta-da! So hopefully you painted this with me. And here it is. See you next time.